Well, good morning, everybody. Another fantastic day of Grace Hopper. Who's here been having a fantastic time so far at this conference? Can I get some noise on that one? Thank you very much. My name's Nick Faulkner. I'm from the School of Computer Science at the University of Adelaide, and I'm just going to do a quick bit of admin, then I'm going to contribute to what men are doing to solve the gender problem by getting off the stage. To my left, your right, you will see the exits, which if you need to, you can head out that way. If I could remind you all to make sure that your phones are on silent. And it's now my pleasure to introduce this panel on gender balance, what are men doing to solve the problem? And it's my pleasure to introduce Emma Jones, who is a talent strategist turned entrepreneur with over 25 years' experience in people and talent disciplines. Her experience spans bootstrap startups to global corporates across the UK, US, and Australia. Having worked in the tech sector for most of her career, Emma developed a passion for solving the problem of achieving gender balance in the technology sector. And in 2017, she founded community meetup group Men Championing Change to equip forward-thinking men in tech with what they need to close the gender gap in their teams. Please join me in welcoming Emma to the podium.
Thank you. Hello, Grace Hopper Conference. We are extremely excited to be here, me in particular. So my name is Emma Jones, and the company that I run is called Project F. And Project F helps organisations to achieve the gender balance in their tech teams. But today we're here to talk about Men Championing Change, the meetup group that I started in 2017. And before I introduce the panel to you, I just want to check everyone's got a bingo card. Everyone got a bingo card? Good. Now, I heard that a couple of years ago at the actual Grace Hopper conference in the US, there was a panel called Male Allies. And apparently there was a bit of mansplaining dropped into the talk. And it didn't go down too well, which put the fear of God into me at the time when I read it, because I thought, okay, we don't really want to fall into that. So I actually want you as an audience to hold us to account on that. And that means that if we do drop any of those things in, feel free to stamp them out. And if you get bingo, shout bingo. You can call us out. Okay, so it's just a bit of fun, really. But I also wanted to say that, you know, the purpose of us being here as a group of men championing change is not to portray this kind of bunch of guys showing up with capes on to save all the women in tech. That's not what it's about at all. It's a very different purpose. We're here as a collective group of people, and it's men and women. Men Championing Change is a group of very diverse people, but all with the same purpose to improve the gender balance in tech. But I want to tell you why, okay? I'm going to just explain to you how this kind of journey came about and how Men Championing Change started. So this is your panel. Who are going to introduce themselves individually to you afterwards. But this is how it started. So a couple of years ago, I read this book. And this book was a game changer for me. So 7 Steps to a Gender Balanced Business. It gave me this understanding, it was like a light bulb moment for me, that there was me working in people and culture, or HR, or whatever you want to call it, as I had been for many years in tech, and trying to move this issue forward of, you know, the fact that we had so few women in our teams. And so I was trying to influence the CTO, who just went, yeah, we want more women, you know, let's just get me more and I'll hire them. You're like, okay, it doesn't quite as easy as that. And I got a lot of pushback from the teams. They didn't really understand why we needed more women, or they just said, oh, well, you know, just hire people on merit, we just need the best person, and the whole, do we have to lower the bar? You can tick that one off. You know, that kind of stuff, right? So it was really difficult, and I realized through reading this, which if you do decide to read this, and I certainly recommend it, it made me realize that actually I'm trying to influence through me. They're never going to listen to me. I'm a woman in HR. And that, unfortunately, is how we tend to try and move this issue forward. Diversity and inclusion tends to be owned in most companies by HR. or people and culture. And people and culture don't necessarily know how to solve this problem, because what they're doing is looking at diversity and inclusion across an entire business. Okay, but tech, as you'll all know, is a tricky subculture. It's not like anywhere else in your business. So women who are working in HR in a tech company, women who are working in finance, in marketing, they have an incredibly different experience of applying for a job and working in a job and navigating through a career than a woman who's working in a technology team. And that was the big difference. So the only way, there's this lady who wrote this book pointed out, the only way we're going to really move this forward is to actually get the people who are working in the positions of power and influence to make that change, to drive the agenda forward. And I thought, okay, I've been getting it wrong all this time. All these women, there's loads of women's groups all working towards this stuff and trying to push it. You know, everyone's going to meetings to talk about how hard it is and how what women should do. And I realised it's not what women should do, it's actually what men should do. 90% of those leadership roles that have the influence, that have the ability to move this forward and advance this, are men. So I thought, okay, so if I can start a group and get all these guys to come along to it and give them the tools and the resources and the inspiration and the role models and what they need to be able to do it, that could actually have an impact. And do you know what? It worked. That's the bit I'm most excited about. It worked. So I want to tell you how. The way it works, and this is what we do. Men Championing Change is a meetup group, so it's just one of the many tech meetup groups there are. We've grown to about 600 people. We've just opened a Melbourne chapter as well, because it's just really well attended, you know, and people love it, and I get so much great feedback from it, and it's attended by men and women. But what we do is we go to a technology leader, like one of the ones we've got sitting here, and we say, would you mind speaking at one of the events about this topic, whatever it is? And they go, oh, I don't know anything about that. And oh, we don't do that here. We're really bad for that where I work, or whatever. And I say to them, you don't need to know about it, because I know about it, and I'm going to give you everything you need to be able to build a deck and present. All you need to do is use your male privilege, because people will listen to you. And you're using your position in the community. So you're a CTO at whatever the company is, whether it's Qantas or Woolies or Finder or whoever. People know who you are, and if you're speaking, they will come. If it's another woman talking about diversity and inclusion, they won't come and they won't listen. So they go, oh, okay, if you're going to give me everything and I'm just starting the conversation, I'll do that. And this is when the best bit happens. I send them all the information. They then go on a journey of discovery. So they start researching beyond what I've given them in order to pull a deck together. And then they get all that kind of wonderful, you know, the light bulb moments go off for them, and they go, God, I didn't realize this. And oh my God, you know, and oh my God, and all these, you know, moments of clarity. And so when they turn up on the night, they present this thing that they've then done more research on and learned about, and they present it with real genuine passion, and that comes across. And so that's when the magic happens in the room. And from that, people are tweeting, people are talking about it, more conversations happen. The leader themselves will go away and make changes in their team and their business and start talking to their leadership about it. And the people who have come along to see it also will take that away and talk about it in their own companies. So this is what Men Championing Change does. It's not a group of people who are just talking about stuff they know nothing about. They're learning about it. And that's what we're doing here. The people who are here have come to this conference to continue that journey of learning. And to also continue to spread the word that actually it really is important that it's people like the technology leaders that we need to influence to help change this and move this forward. Now, what I also want to do is just talk to you a little bit about Male Champions of Change as well. So if you've heard of Male Champions of Change, I want to mention to you that we're not the same thing. So Male Champions of Change is a huge group that is run by a lady called Liz Broderick, and it's a very senior level of policy change across the whole of Australia. So whether it's sports, media, technology, parliament, government, whatever, they're doing the same kind of thing for the same reason, and they harness these very senior leaders across the whole of the country, whether it be in government or policy or commerce, and they look at moving the dial from a very high level of policy change. So I called it Men Championing Change to kind of be a bit of a spin-off on that, because it's the same premise of actually having men who are in positions that are able to make that influence, rather than it being a women's problem, if you like. Okay, so just to explain a little bit more about this, to make sure it's really clear, about 90% of the people who are rattling cages and doing something about this are women at the moment. However, the people that can change it, about 90% of those people who can change it are men. And what we have is this group of men. I've split them down like this. So you've got about 10% of those people who can change it, are super engaged and want to do something. 80% of them are aware, but they're not really motivated. And then you've got the 10% that will always, at this point in time, be opposed. So what we do in Men Championing Change is we try and use our 10% to reduce the 80% and grow that top 10%. Okay, so I'm going to now just give you a bit of a taste of what some of the people who have presented and are involved in Men Championing Change think about the group.
MCC, since I've been involved, has helped me understand more about the things that I've been doing at work that have been not conducive to having a truly diverse and inclusive workplace. So me and my management team have been reflecting on things that we were unaware of that weren't helping, and trying to be a bit more conscious about our environment and how it can be supportive of diversity and inclusivity. And a large part that's been thanks to the Men Championing Change meetup group.
Men Championing Change has made a huge impact, not only on me personally, but in the way I've been able to affect change in my business, and been able to really impact some of the learnings within gender diversity in technology, learning across gender pay equity, the merit trap, several other key topics. It's such an awesome community of people, and we all get to share our learnings with each other, and hopefully have an impact on the world of technology for the better.
We all know about the huge benefits of diversity to businesses like Qantas. The key to success of the Men Championing Change meetup is it gives you a heap of research and provides clear actions for you to take. Most importantly though, it actually follows you up. It turns actions into actioned.
It's been great to see Men Championing Change bringing awareness to the gender equality issue. The problem has always existed but been swept under the carpet for a long time now. So it's great to see MCC bringing the subject into focus. I've seen a lot more leaders at companies I deal with discussing the problem and starting to look closer into what actions they can take to drive that change. I think the momentum is gaining, and I look forward to seeing what the further impact is had by MCC.
It's been really great to be a part of the Men Championing Change group over the last 2 years. Working with Emma has been fantastic, and the team to pull together a wide range of people and experiences from lots of different industries to help share and grow the approaches that we have and the way we tackle diversity in the tech industry.
Really late. He's in his bathroom and it was really late at night. I was like, that's great. Did you have wine? And he's like, no, I was just really tired. Okay, so you kind of, hopefully now you kind of get the picture that this is what Men Championing Change is all about. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to the panel here, our wonderful panel, who are going to introduce themselves. Dan, let's start with you.
Welcome everyone. So my name is Dan Draper. My day job is the VP or Vice President of Engineering at a startup in Sydney called Expert 360. I'm also heavily involved in the Men Championing Change event that Emma mentioned. I just wanted to make one little point about that. We actually, when we first got started with the event, or the group, sorry, somebody pointed out to us the original name, which was Male Champions of Change, was maybe not the right message, because we weren't trying to, we don't want to elevate men and say how wonderful men are or anything like that. This is more about encouraging a behavioural change. So we try to use champions or championing change, so a verb rather than a noun. So I'm heavily involved in that. I'm also one of the producers of a film. My first time filmmaker and working on a film project, excuse me, called Debugging Diversity, which is all centered around this topic. So how do we encourage men and organizations to start taking gender balance and gender equity in their organizations more seriously? I've been working on that film for about 5 years and continuing to work on it now.
Cool. I'm Joel Hanosky, head of engineering at Canva. Had a lot of experience through a lot of US companies such as Google, Apple, Lyft, and Twitter. Seen all ranges of approaches to diversity and gender equality in the workplace, and been able to bring that into Canva and into Men Championing Change to try to work out what we can really do to make the strides we need to make to get real gender diversity in our workplace.
Hi, I'm Roisin Parks. I'm the CTO at Gumtree. I actually also run a meetup group called the Sydney Female CTOs and CIOs group. And I actually started to get involved in Men Championing Change when last year we actually had a joint meetup group. So we had a lot of the male leaders from Men Championing Change and the female leaders from the Sydney Female CTOs and CIOs come together to see how we could work together to actually resolve this issue. So yeah, that's me.
Hi, my name's Ted Tenza. I'm the VP of Engineering at Prospa, which is a fintech startup in Sydney. Again, I worked with Emma a couple different places before, so she's just fabulous at setting this group up, and I've been really excited to be a part of it. Thanks, Dan, for stealing my talking point about the name change.
Sorry.
I've got it written down. I said it
we
first.
We should have compared notes.
Anyway, so that's me.
Cool, thank you. Okay, so we want to basically tackle some of the questions that I hope that are in your minds about what men are doing to move this agenda forward. And then at the end, we'll have some question time. So be ready, think of the things that you want to say. It doesn't matter how controversial it might be. If it's in your mind, please feel free. This is a safe environment certainly as far as we're concerned. So I'm going to kick off with a question that is always, I hear a lot about this when we're talking about some of the companies that have got female leaders. So I want to ask the two members we've got here who are working for companies with female CEOs. People say, oh, it must be a lot easier for them because they have a female CEO. So, it must be better to work there for women in tech. Not necessarily the case though. So Joel, you've got Melanie Perkins at Canva, and we've got Bridget Loudon at Expert 360, and both of them are very high profile women in tech, or who are running tech companies and have founded them. So does it make a difference?
Yeah, it actually, where it makes a big difference is in the hiring pipeline. We do get a lot of people who apply for jobs at Canva because Melanie is our CEO, and they know that there's a female leader in place, and understanding what that dynamic would be like, or an idea of what the dynamic of having a female leader in the workplace is. And it's great to have that representation so people can look and see, yes, Melanie's is the CEO of this company, she's leading this company, driving it to great success. Where we find the difference is that she's not involved in the engineer recruiting process at all. She's product related, and so she, when there are females in our tech organization, they don't actually have her to look at as a role model, except as a leader. So, not discounting that at all. Of course, there is that leadership aspect, but as far as people's tech careers, it has limited value for them. They don't know where to put their sight, where to put their vision in terms of how they can generate their own career path based on her example.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo those sentiments. I mean, Bridget Loudon is an incredible leader. She's very well known, I think, in certainly in the tech startup space. And a lot of women who come to interview with Expert 360 look to Bridge as a role model, and she's a wonderful role model. I've seen her speak at events like this, actually, and I can see women hanging off her every word. The challenge is that because Bridge is one of the few entrepreneurs in tech, female entrepreneurs in tech, along with Melanie and a small handful of others, there's an enormous expectation on her to be on panels and to write articles and to be in the press. And she doesn't want to spend time talking about that. She wants to spend time talking about Expert 360, the thing that she's devoted her life to. And so in some cases, in some sense, it actually almost has a backfire effect, because she sort of pushes back against that. She's like, I don't have time for this, I want to focus on my business, which, I mean, to be fair, is completely understandable. She's already up against it. She's going through capital raising and trying to sell to big enterprise. So it actually, in some sense, doesn't help in that regard, which makes it a very challenging issue.
That was my big question, because I think that when I talk about these companies, people automatically assume that it must be easier to hire women into those environments, and it isn't. So at the end of the day, they are founders and CEOs who happen to be women. It doesn't automatically make them huge gender diversity advocates for tech, right? Okay, so just leading on from that, interestingly, what you said about the whole thing with Bridge, the expectation on Bridge. So Roisin, as one of the very few female CTOs, and I know I've searched for many of them for speaking things in Sydney and gone through pages and pages and pages of LinkedIn before I find 3 that there are, and I know all of them. So how is it for you? How does that affect you in terms of your career and work? And expectations.
Expectations is probably the word, I think, because obviously as a CTO for a company, that's a big job in itself, and so there's lots of expectations and what you can do as a CTO. I think also there's an expectation, or there certainly was when I joined the company, that as a female CTO, that would suddenly mean a pile of women would automatically magically turn up to the company, which of course doesn't happen either. No. There's work that needs to be done. So I think that is a big expectation. And so what happened in my case was shortly after I joined the company, obviously they made a big announcement, female CTO, and so there was a bit of press. And it was around the time of the Google Anti-Diversity Manifesto. So suddenly I was getting approached by media to give my opinion on this, and I realized I had very little information and hadn't a lot of things that I could actually say, so I decided I better do a bit of research. And so then you realize that there aren't a lot of women out there who are in a position of power and authority who can actually speak in Sydney, certainly anyway. So you do get asked to a lot of events to speak and speak on panels and speak at various different events, which is time consuming. So there's always that trade-off. And even the meetup group that I run, I ran a few meetups last year. This year I've been, struggling to get the time in my free time to actually do that as well. So there are kind of a lot of pressures to be able to do all of that. But I think for me, one of the things that makes me realize it's really important to keep doing that is the feedback that I get after I speak at events. Like I spoke at an event just on a panel like this a couple of months back, and I got a Facebook message from someone out of the blue randomly afterwards, and she just said that the stuff I had been talking about helped her make the decision to stay in tech. And I think those are the things that kind of, there is an awful lot of expectation and pressure for you to keep being visible as a female leader in tech. But at the same time, the CTO job is quite a big job, and you have a lot of time constraints. So,
So how can we take the burden off women to do that? Because you do hear that quite a lot, certainly, again, at engineering level as well, that women don't want to be put on this, pedestal and said, here's a woman in tech. I just want to be a person who works in tech. So how do we take that burden away? How can, the group or anybody in any company help to take that burden off the women?
You have to step up. you have to step up and you have to take on that responsibility, right? You know, as a leader, I'm responsible for hiring the hiring pipeline and the recruiting at my company, and so I talk to the recruiters and I make sure that they understand how important gender diversity is. I look at, you know, I get a report every week, how many candidates, how many of them are female, and if it's too low, I go back to the recruiters and I say, we need to do better. So it's just a case of, you know, taking ownership and taking action is what we need to do, and don't expect women to do this.
I think I completely agree, although I would say it's, you know, I actually believe there are quite a lot of men who at some level feel that they need to do something, but they haven't the faintest idea where to start. Or if they do have a faint idea, it's maybe not the best idea. I've seen that happen a few times. And, you know, to be frank, I was probably one of those guys, and maybe still am to some extent. I'm still making mistakes. I describe when I first started exploring this topic 5 years ago, I suppose, as my fall-off idiot mountain. You know, if you've ever heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect, it's this idea that when you first learn a topic, you assume you know more than you do, and then as you learn a bit more, you're like, oh, actually, I don't know that much. And for me, that was a catastrophic fall and pretty eye-opening. And I think the challenge is that a lot of men are probably still sitting on top of Idiot Mountain thinking, oh, yeah, we totally need to get more women, like you were saying before with your CEO. And so then the first thing they do is they go and ask a woman, and probably that woman, I mean, in many cases, certainly in my experience, has already been asked that question many times, like, oh, for God's sake, again, here we go, like, just go read a book, will you, dude? But then the problem is we run the risk of alienating those men early on in the process. If they're you know, we need to kind of get them at the point where they're motivated to do something, and then make sure that we give them a few resources. I'm not saying that we need to put lots of responsibility on women. This is absolutely not that. But just kind of giving them a nudge in the right direction. And I think something like Males Championing Change is a great start. Like if you're a woman in tech and a bloke comes up to you and asks you for advice, say, hey, I'd love to help, but you should totally go and check out this group, Males Championing Change. That'll give you everything you need. So I think those kinds of things are the kinds of conversations we need to be having.
So, Ted, I wanted to ask you about, I know that we were talking this morning about some of the stuff that Prosper's been doing. How much of that stuff have you got from being part of the group?
Some of it. So some of the things that we're doing at Prosper to try to help increase our diversity is we're rolling out flexible work programs formally. So interestingly enough, the technology team always kind of had the flexible work because we just can't attract engineers if we don't. But now we're making it formal, we're making it for the entire company, and we're publicizing it so that people don't have to ask about it. Because if you're in, you know, one of the things I've noticed is if you're in sort of interviews, we sort of make female candidates ask about things that then maybe subconsciously will then start holding against them. If they're saying, oh, what's your family leave policy? Then all of a sudden your interview is going, oh, you're not going to be here, you know, things like that. So we are very upfront and we explain it to people so that it doesn't go on, it's not the burden on them to ask about it. We tell them what it is. And so those are the kind of things that we're trying to do to try to help the recruiting process. And also the retention. I mean, having that flexibility and having those programs in place really helps with retention.
Yeah, I think you talk about having flexibility and some of those other things, and I think in large corporates, so like the BHPs of this world and various other companies, like the big corporate world, that stuff's a given. But in the smaller, you know, more live kind of startup world, where they start off with, you know, 5 engineers, and before you know it, you're 150 people, you don't necessarily think we have a policy or we need a policy. So those are the things that do need to be driven in companies like the likes of who are sitting here.
That's actually a really good point. One of the things is it's often the onus is put onto people who have these other needs, like women often do, to ask the questions. And at Canva as well, we have a lot of flexible policies. I was very flexible with anyone on the team who needed time off, had to drop off kids, had to take family leave, whatever it was regarding. But the problem was, and it became very obvious, that people had to ask about it. And of course, an 18-year-old, 18, I'm talking about prodigies here, like someone straight out of uni isn't, especially a young male, straight out of uni, is not going to be asking, oh, can I drop my kids off at school and then come in at 10 o'clock every day? Is that fine? So actually documenting these policies is super important. So it becomes something that people don't have to ask, and you don't feel weird asking. You don't feel like you're breaking a rule by asking about those things that are actually standard work practices.
So I've got a question but it's a bit more general. And it's not on my list because I was just thinking about it, because I went to a couple of the talks yesterday that and they're very good, and I've really enjoyed the stuff I've seen here so far, but there still, it feels to me that there's a bit of an onus on women to manage these things. So you learn how to negotiate your pay. You learn how to navigate your career and get yourself up. So women, you have to do it. So where's the onus on, where's the responsibility of leaders? Where does that sit in it?
Just want to say one thing first about that whole you need to learn how to negotiate thing, is that there's a real subtext there that says it's because you haven't learned to negotiate, that's why your pay gap is there. Therefore, the pay gap isn't the corporate's responsibility, it's your fault. And that's just such a terrible subtext, which is why that entire conversation is just so wrong. So even the start of that conversation is approaching it from the wrong angle, and you're not going to get to the results that you want.
So is Prosper doing anything about that, about taking that away? Because I remember it wasn't necessarily a great
Yes, we do.
process.
Now we do annual pay reviews, and we specifically look to see if there is pay gaps, and we have corrected it. So, for instance, my team, I've got 5 team leads reporting to me, and one of them is female, and she was paid less than the other 4, and so we gave her a fairly significant bump so that she would be paid on par, so
Okay.
like for like.
Okay, but what about the leader part? Where's the leader's responsibility in learning and knowing how to, how to manage those things with all of their people, not just the guys who ask?
I mean, my rule of thumb with this stuff is that in order to have a successful outcome in any business situation, it's 2/3 at least is the responsibility of the leaders of the organization, and less than 1/3 is the responsibility of the individuals in the team. So it's not to say that it's all one or the other. I think it's a two-way street, but leaders need to absolutely have way more take more responsibility than they have now.
But aren't leaders measured on their knowledge and capability? Is that in a leader's capability to?
Typically now, no,
Yeah.
absolutely not. And that's something that
But
has to
it should be,
change.
right?
Yes, totally.
Yeah,
And
okay.
actually, I think this is why, or it's one of the main reasons why we suffer so badly in the technology industry. So when
Yeah.
you actually look at the stats of, because flexible working and all of that is all great and it's all needed, but there are lots of other industries that have or do not have the same level of flexible working who don't struggle with the same gender imbalance that technology does. And I think that going back to your earlier point, there is that subculture in technology that means we have to do something different, and that means different from HR policies or flexible working policies. It actually comes down to the culture at a team level, and I think that's why the leadership is so incredibly important. And you're right, we don't actually guide our leaders or teach our leaders that this is something that's important. And within technology, traditionally what we've done is we've promoted the best engineers, not necessarily the best leaders. And so we have that double whammy where we have a lot of leaders in technology who don't necessarily have, good leadership acumen,
Right.
and we teach them anything about this.
No, we do the standard 101 manager training that goes across the entire business. Right.
If that.
Yeah.
So, but the other problem is, as Roisin pointed out, is when you do promote sort of the best developer on the team, you've also got a lot of unconscious bias where women aren't seen as technical, even if they are. So they have that strike against them when you're trying to promote them.
I think that also comes into, has anyone seen Tanya Riley's talk, Being Glue? If you haven't, Google it, it's awesome. So she actually spoke at one of Emma's Project F events recently, but I looked it up on YouTube and I found a video of it where she spoke previously. So this idea of being glue is when it's typically women, although it can have an impact on anyone in a team, but it's typically women. When, say you've got a team function, or you've got maybe it's organizing stand-up or making sure there's a meeting room, it's almost always the woman on the team who takes care of that stuff. And when she's doing that, what happens is she's not now necessarily investing in some of the more traditional kind of engineering activities that you might expect somebody to do in an engineering team.
Writing code.
Writing code reviews, all that kind of stuff. So then what happens is when managers promote engineers, they're doing it only on the, let's say, non-glue activities, and we're totally missing out on some really high-performing individuals because we've got the wrong, maybe, definition of merit. You know, people often talk about meritocracies, but what is your definition of merit, and how does that even make sense? Yeah. So I think that the whole being glue thing is really, really important, because then when you start to assess leadership, you need to look at the whole picture. You need to look at what are all the different things that are contributing to this person being a great member of our team, and then concurrently need to be holding men accountable to taking on some of those responsibilities as well, which is something I've worked very hard in my team on.
So maybe all technology leaders and tech lead CTOs, maybe it should be part of their onboarding and training to watch Being Glue by Tanya Riley. I think that would be good. I want to just draw a quick parallel. So we've got the average number of women in engineering teams and technology teams, I should say, in Australia is pretty small. And we've got, so if you've got over 25 or 30%, you are rocking it. The majority around the sort of 15%-ish. So what we have now is we've got two very different organisations with very different numbers sitting here. We've got Dan at Expert 360, they have 34% female, which is really high. So I kind of use Dan a lot for this stuff. And then we've got Joel, so Canva, which is frequently been best place to work, #1 best place to work in Australia, and it is awesome. It is awesome. They do some amazing things for their employees, and they have a really good balance generally across the business, but they have 16%. So the size of teams is massively different. You've got what? How many have you got now?
Engineering about 25.
About 25, and you've got
268.
Okay, so a big difference.
10 times, yeah.
So is this? So I've got kind of two questions here to try and draw some parallels here, because it's not easy to achieve what Dan's done, even with a small team. In fact, it makes no difference, but even with a small team, it's really bloody hard. So you have to really be focused. Now, the speed of growth that has happened with Canva has probably forced your hand in a way that you've had to land grab talent, and it's a case of what's available to a degree. So where is the difference? If you weren't at Expert 360, Dan, would they remain with 34%? Is there anything systemic, what's supporting it?
I mean, certainly there wasn't when I arrived, and I'm not saying that I'm taking credit for all of that change, but there has been a lot of change over the last couple of years that I think has had a big impact. I should also say that we didn't necessarily set out to we didn't have a target for number of women in the team. We didn't set out to hit 35 or 40% or whatever it was. We set out to make Expert 360 an attractive and appealing place for a wide audience of engineers to come and work for, and so that involved kind of really thinking through our job ads and sort of our careers page, and we actually do have a ping pong table at the office, but it's not on our careers page anymore.
Dismantle the ping pong tables, that's what I say.
having sort of thinking about team events a little bit differently, so we went and played lawn bowls instead of going go-karting and paintballing. And that goes way beyond just gender issues too. Things like making sure that you've got halal food options and vegan options and all those kinds of things. And then we made sure that we had women in the interview process, and particularly early on in the interview process. And then, we were talking about this before, but Bridge, our CEO, was also part of that process, at least in the early days. So she probably did have a role there.
Yeah.
I think for us, though, the challenge is sustaining that. I mean, now that we have more women in the team, it's a little bit easier because there's less burden on women to be in the interview process. It's really tough when you've only got one woman in the team and you've got to have a woman in every interview. That means now she's in every interview, which is, once
more
again,
glue.
she's not writing any code.
More glue.
More glue, exactly. Yeah. So once you sort of have a critical mass, it's a little bit easier.
Yeah.
If and when Expert 360 gets to the point where we're scaling as fast as Canva did over the last couple of years, then I think it's going to become increasingly challenging. And that's the hardest problem, I think, because the business leaders will suddenly go, we just got to grow. We've got to grow. We've got all this money from investors, and the prerogatives change, which I suspect is what's happened.
So how's it affected Canva then, with that speed of growth?
Yeah, when I started at Canva in March of 2017, there were 48 engineers,
Wow.
of whom there were 2 female engineers. So that's 4%. And a lot of that was driven, even though the culture of the place is awesome and very accepting, it actually did have this, just the way that Canva was hiring at the time was not attracting people who had that sort of experience. Like, female engineers were not applying to Canva. Like, I looked at the pipeline and it was all guys. And
well, they used to insist on computer science degrees for starters, which I know has changed a bit recently.
Yes,
that has
changed. That was something we managed to cleanse from some of the non-historical job recs. But in growing so fast and actually exponentially growing to 268, at first there was a big push to hire. Hire as many people as possible. I remember being in, I was in every decision meeting for every candidate early on, and most of them were guys, and we would sit down, and as we were discussing a candidate, Cliff would often walk past the outside of the room and go, "It's a hire, right?" And we go, "Hang on, no, it may not be, might not be the right one." But it was like, let's get as many people in because we've got such a large roadmap. We've got plenty of money to hire people. Let's get people in to do it. And so the recruiters also were incented to source people and get people in the door. So their stuff was all about numbers. And I remember having a conversation very early on with the recruiting team saying, we need more diversity. We need to get more representation across all of our engineering teams. And they're saying, but I have to hire 10 people this quarter. How do I do that? And well, you work hard to do it. But they were at a loss. They were actually being measured against the number of people they could bring in, not even necessarily the quality of people that they were bringing in, or any representation at all. And so over the time I was there, we actually did get to 16%. We did have some programs to bring in more senior leadership who are women in tech. And so it's still not great, it's still 17% type, but goal to get to 30. But once we had that momentum, it was actually easier to retrofit. And I would actually say, I'm going to reject all the rest of your candidates from now on unless I see some female candidates coming through, some underrepresented groups coming through, and refuse to do it. And really upset especially our new grad hires. They were going, but we're going to universities and it's not our fault that 80% of these people are male. Go, well, you just have to work harder. I'm not a recruiter. I don't know how to do this job. You're the expert. Find me more candidates. And they did, and they actually turned it around. I talked to them in January, and we had hired 10 people, of which one was a female candidate for that pipeline. When we got to March, we hired 7 people, and 6 of them were female. So they can do it, and it's very hard to do it with these metrics that they're using, but it became easier the more people that we had, for sure.
So we're talking about that end of the pipeline, right? But there is a big part of it that is about retention, because the stats are that 56% of women will leave tech at the midpoint of their career, which is between 7 and 10 years. So that means, looking at this room, probably that half of you won't be here, or actually maybe a little bit more, at some point, which is pretty damning. And the reasons are not to go and have children, right? So again, a lot of CTOs will go, yeah, but it's to have babies. It's not. So there are some very clear reasons, and there's a lot of data to say why they leave and where they go. So what happens? How do we change that part of it? It's not just, it's great getting them in, but how do we keep them and progress them? So Roisin, Ted, what do you guys do? What are your companies doing to try and address that?
So that's a big thing for me that I'm very passionate about. And I think one of the reasons that we have so few women leaders, CIOs and CTOs, is because so many women leave along the way. And there's Again, it's coming back to data, because I think one of the mistakes I made early on is that you kind of assume every other woman in tech is having the same experience as you, and that's just blatantly not true. And I think we have not done a very good job of doing proper analysis and research onto the reasons why women leave and why this problem exists. More recently, there has been research, which that's where that figure comes from, the 56% of women leaving. And the top reasons for women leaving are maybe not the ones that people kind of bandy about as being the main thing. As you say, going off to have babies, that's not the reason. So one of the key reasons is lack of support from your manager, and that sits squarely within the leadership of an organization to fix. One of the other reasons that women leave is that they're not getting access to the projects that will get them that promotion, the high profile work. And some of that is due to the kind of unspoken networks that happen, you know, it's the conversations that happen standing at the urinals. You know,
or the ping pong table,
yeah,
the pool
it's
table.
the people in it's the people in positions of power that have these networks that unfortunately are 90% men, and so suddenly you're not even being mentioned in those kind of conversations. And then there's also the kind of bad behavior stuff that happens. And even if it doesn't directly happen to you, what's ending up happening is that women are, even the ones that do go into university and graduate, there's a massive proportion of those women who never join the technology industry because they're put off by what's talked about in the news and all those kinds of things. And that's actually getting worse.
Yeah.
So I think retention is a massive piece, and actually kind of going back to what Dan was saying earlier, the problem with when you have a big team and that percentage is skewed towards men, it's very hard to change. But also when you have a small team, and even if you do manage to get that balance the way you want, if you have 2 or 3 women leave, it suddenly swings massively in the other direction again. So it's very hard to kind of get the critical mass of women that you need to build up that culture and actually allow your organization to grow. But the kind of what Joel was talking about earlier too about recruitment, the way recruitment companies currently work in Australia and actually globally does not incentivize any of them to fix this problem. So you have women leaving at 56% across the industry, and you can't even hire fast enough to replace those people. So first of all, we've got to fix that problem. But then the other problem is, how do we actually fix the recruitment? And that won't be fixed until recruitment companies are actually incentivized to hire more women or place more women.
Absolutely. Ted, you guys have grown a bit, haven't you? You've addressed your balance.
I want to address something first. The thing about sort of supportive management and lack of supportive management. And I think it's really important. Sort of my sort of real wake-up moment happened a while ago. And I think I'm probably going to fill out one of the squares here. And that I've always thought of myself as being an advocate and supporting it and things like that. But I had to, but what happened about 10 years ago, I was at a company and we had a last-minute sponsorship to a Girl Geeks dinner. And so they bought a table of 10 for the sponsorship and sent 9 men to the Girls Geek dinner. And it was horrible. And there was a huge debate on the internal wiki for the next couple of days. And before that, I always listened, right? But I always listened and then put it through my filter of my experience, going, okay, well, yes, we did something really stupid, but you called us on it, and we're going to correct it, and see, everything's fine. We're a really cool organization. But somebody told me something, and they were like, if we spent, and this was a female engineer saying, if we spent all of our time telling you what's wrong and all these things, I wouldn't get anything else done, because my entire day would be pointing out how many times you're screwing up this thing.
Yeah.
So I switched from listening to believing. Right now, when one of my female engineers tells me something, I automatically believe it and try to do it. And I don't sit there and put it through my own filter. So that's sort of how I try to be a supportive sort of manager. And I think that helps a lot with recruiting. When a female engineer who has a problem isn't being told, well, work it out, or you're exaggerating, or it's not that bad. If they're coming to you with it, it's bad enough for them to come to you with it. Believe them and take action.
Yeah.
I think that's
Again,
important.
it's manager training, manager coaching on, as what in that book she talks about gender bilingual management. And I think that's a really great term, and it's something that should be mandatory for those people to have. So I just want to open it out now and just see if anybody in the audience has got some questions. We have a couple. Yes.
Hello, everyone.
Sasha.
I think I know everyone.
I think you do.
Firstly, I just want to say thank you so much, especially to Dan for the movie that you're making. I just want to say, everyone, I've already donated. I think Emma's already donated. Log on to Indiegogo tonight and search for debugging diversity. Just put $10, $20, $30.
We can make it happen at Hopper Down Under 2019. We can make debugging diversity, the movie, happen.
Sasha.
I'm keen for it.
Thanks, Sasha.
Okay, now for my question. So, this is actually something that I haven't seen talked about at this conference, sort of generally, and something I'm very interested in. So, my husband currently is a senior software engineer at Google. He's been working there a long time, and he works 3 days a week and looks after our daughter the other 2 days. I work full time. And when I tell people that, some people are like, wow, you're a really progressive family. Well, no, most people actually do this, and it actually works out really well. But he's looking to move, and when he interviews at companies and asks them for part-time, he gets laughed out of the room, and people don't take him seriously. On the other hand, when I ask for part-time or 4-day weeks, people are like, absolutely, we're an equal opportunity employer. We would love you to work, part-time. And I say, well, actually, I'm asking for my husband. And that's sort of what I want to put to you is, what are your thoughts on men working part-time and supporting inclusion through, equal parenting opportunities and equal parental leave at your companies?
That is a great question.
Excellent question.
I love this one.
We had this
I should be on
question.
panel.
This came up in our. Thank you for that. We had this question or this topic of conversation come up in our leadership team meeting just last week, actually. So our COO, who's a woman, put together a. I don't know why that's relevant, but anyway, who was putting together a parental leave policy, and she was sharing it with the rest of the leadership team, and she said, so mums get 12 weeks and dads get 2 weeks. And I said, hang on, how is that helpful? But I challenged her, and she said, no, actually it's not mums get 12 and dads get 2. It's the primary caregiver gets 12 and the secondary caregiver gets 2. But what I found really interesting is that even the person who's put the leadership policy together, and I don't mean any disrespect to her whatsoever, because she does a wonderful job, has we sometimes miss that part of the conversation. I think it's really important on two fronts. One, it's telling guys that it's totally okay to be a stay-at-home dad. We're not sort of emasculating you in any way. But also then making sure that organisations give men an opportunity to do that as well. And I've already said to my wife, if we do decide to have kids, I'm more than happy to stay at home.
We're actually going to run something on this in MCC in February probably, because I've had another person contact me in my network saying my husband works it's a big telco, and he wants to go part-time for this same reason, so she can go back full-time. And it's such an issue. And my advice, by the way, to him was don't say at this point in time, as things are, don't say part-time, because you won't. If you go searching for part-time, there'll be hardly anything. But like you say, you have to wait until you're actually in that environment before you have that conversation about flexibility. That's what I would say to women as well at this point in time. Yes, you had a question before. Did you still want to ask that?
Thank you. What does it actually take to change men's perception of women's capabilities? And is there any roadmap to achieve it? Because I have come across lots of research, and the most cause of gender imbalance in industry is perception of women.
Someone else want to? I've got some thoughts, but
for me, I think there's 3 things. One is data. So there is research out there, and this goes for all leaders in tech, I would say, not just men. But so do your research. I think that's the key message I would give for men, because the research out there is overwhelming in terms of the benefit of having women in technology. There isn't a huge amount of research on how we fix it. But the benefits for why you have gender balanced teams, I think, are quite good. The second thing is motivation. So I think until men understand, or technology leaders understand, why you would want to have balanced teams, they're not going to put in the extra effort that's required to get to those balanced teams. So data and motivation are kind of two critical aspects. And then the third one, I think, which is the one that's a little bit trickier, is actually allowing men some space to make some mistakes. And one of the things that horrified me about that manual from 2014 is that, yes, okay, they made a huge number of mistakes, but it was very confronting for those people. And so if we actually chase them away from the table before they've actually learned anything about this subject, then it's going to be increasingly difficult to get more and more of those men on board. And so I think, giving men a bit of space to make a few mistakes, and
Exactly.
I'd just like to add one other thing. I think language is really, really important. And as a technology leader, you should really pay attention to not just what people are saying, but how they're saying it, and do they say it differently for different people. So, a male is confident, a woman is pushy. And you call it out, and you have a responsibility to call it out. And when you do that, when you start using the language more neutrally, the perception gap also kind of narrows.
Yeah.
As I've been promoting the film, I've been going around and speaking at meetups, and a lot of the meetups that I go to are almost all guys. And so when I share some of these things with them, a lot of them get quite defensive. And I had one young guy come up to me and said, I really like what you're doing, and sure, equality is good and all that, but men are just better at software coding, aren't they? And I said, well, dude, okay, let me just share something with you. And there's one particular study that I shared with him, and it wasn't coding per se, it was actually maths. I guess maths is perhaps a little bit easier to have a very a clear sense of what's right or what's wrong, and coding is a bit more subjective, as you all know. There was a study done where they had two groups. The first group was 50% men, 50% women, and they were asked to do a maths test. There was no context given. They just said, here, go and do the maths test. Everyone came out and they did the maths test. And as you might expect, there was a fair range of scores. Some did really well, some did not so well. But there was absolutely no correlation between sex or gender and capability in that maths test. Then what they did, they brought in another group, same demographics, 50-50 split. And then they said, so by the way, before you do this test, we just wanted to tell you that typically women don't perform as well as men. And guess what? That group, the women didn't perform as well as the men. So sometimes just by saying to women, or telling any group that they're not as good as another group, it starts to have this cognitive effect.
And this is what happens to women over their lives, is that it starts very early, and so they have imposter syndrome. And it's unfounded, but it's for those reasons. So I think we've probably got time for one more question. Someone pick somebody. Should we ask the man? Or should we ask...
I'm just a man, not the man.
Oh yeah, the man with his hand up.
I wanted to follow on from the previous topic, and this is about making hiring decisions based on demonstrated capability.
Okay.
So, is that a good strategy?
Not on isolation.
I would make one comment. There's a I can't remember the name of the bias, but there is a common cognitive bias where people who are hiring tend to hire men based on their potential and tend to hire women based on what they've done. I guess cognitive biases are hard, and I'm not going to propose that I know how to fix those, but if you start to tackle those biases and get everyone to assess on potential as well as what people have achieved, that's I guess the first part of it.
And it's the same with promotion, by the way.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same with promotion. So none of those things can be taken in isolation. So it's the whole, you've got to take the whole picture.
How do you think about assessing potential?
Well, it's part of a rigorous interview process. Your interview process should be more than one-dimensional. You need to have a number of different components to it that measures whether you use psychometrics or a competency and behavioural-based interview. You need to know what behaviours are looking to identify to start with. There's a whole bunch of stuff, but talent acquisition should be able to help you with that if you have it.
I guess I've seen situations where confidence and competence get sort of mixed up.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of that that we dealt with at Canva was around training the interviewers not to think in that narrow term. So we had found that when someone was answering a technical question, people were expecting different answers from different candidates, and it wasn't just male female, but it was also junior senior, it was also people from different racial backgrounds. It was across the board, and what we did was we set an expectations framework around the interview process and educated people on what to look for and made sure that they were more general things. And we would actually ask a specific question about potential, like, do you think that this person could learn this skill given a certain amount of time? And did a gauge, like if they never had done JavaScript before, how long do you think it would take this person to get their brain around that? And if it was like, oh, wouldn't they maybe never would do it, then that's fine, we would reject. But if it was like in a month they would be fluent, or at least competent.
So we are out of time, but thank you so much. I just want to point out a couple of quick things. If you want to follow MCC, Men Championing Change, there's our Twitter handle, so follow us on there. There's usually all kinds of great stuff on the meetup page as well. Project F, my company, there's a whole bunch of resources. If you've got a company that you need to educate in this, there's a whole load of stuff on there that will be helpful, including a study of women in tech. There is something you can download from there as well with some up-to-date 2019 stats on what women want. Indiegogo, if anybody wants to look at it for a corporate thing, if you were thinking maybe your own company might want to sponsor it and be associated with what's going to be great when it comes out, speak to Dan at some point in the break. And other than that, thank you so much for coming and for listening and getting involved.
Thank you. Did anyone say bingo? No one had bingo?